Let's do this. Hello, everyone. I'm Dani, and welcome to our podcast. Today, Great.com talks with Bob Stokes, who is the president of the Galveston Bay Foundation. If you haven't heard about it, they are a conservation nonprofit that preserves and enhances the Galveston Bay, working to facilitate a true cross-section of Bay interests through creative, inclusive, and forward-thinking solutions to the challenges confronting Galveston Bay. If you're new here to this podcast, remember to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Hi, Bob, and welcome to our podcast.
Hey, hello, Danny.
Thank you so much for talking to us. I feel like the first step to this conversation is to understand where exactly the bay is located. So if you could just give some info on that and how big it is. How big is it?
Yeah, so Galveston Bay is it's basically between the city of Galveston, which is down on the coast on the Gulf of Mexico, and the city of Houston, which is about 50 miles inland. And so the bay stretches all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up right almost to downtown Houston, maybe 10 or 20 miles from downtown Houston. And so it's the largest bay in Texas and the 7th largest bay in the entire country. And so it's a great center of commerce. Many years ago, the biggest city, and this was before 1900, the biggest city in Texas was Galveston, actually, which is actually a very small city now. But it got hit by a hurricane, a big hurricane in 1900, and it killed a lot of people, did a lot of damage. And the leaders of that time period decided that it was not safe to be on the coast, so directly on the coast. And so they retreated back towards Houston and began to dig a ship channel in Galveston Bay to allow bigger ships to come all the way up into Houston, which was perceived to be more protected from big weather events. And about the same time, oil was discovered. And before you knew it, you had a really large industrial complex around Galveston Bay on the Houston Ship Channel. And we still have that today.
I think, well, first, thank you for giving me this idea, because I was actually quite lost when you just said the numbers, but when you said, oh, it's one of the largest bays in the country, that really puts into perspective. And I think that every time that we talk about environmental issues, this is the first point that we still have to crack, right? The balance between the industrialization process that has happened and how we go from here to preserving the places and the fauna and the natural species and all of that. So what exactly is the work that the foundation does in this area?
Well, let me, you sort of hit on our culture, and I'll talk about that for a second. We were formed back in 1987, so we're 35 years old. There were some big federal projects that were proposed for the Galveston Bay area, and people thought that it might have some negative impacts to the health of Galveston Bay, and a really, impressive group of volunteers came together to create the Galveston Bay Foundation. And our culture around that is, from the beginning, is that we always tried to work with all the users of the bay. And so by that, I mean the recreational users. Those are the folks who are birders and boaters and fishermen and kayakers, and the people are enjoying the bay, using it for fun. And that's a big segment. A lot of people have second homes along the bay, and they really enjoy, just getting out on the water and experiencing Galveston Bay firsthand. There's also the commercial users. We have a significant commercial fishing industry around Galveston Bay, and it's primarily around oysters. We still have a large natural oyster population, shrimp, and then crabs. And so we work with the commercial fishermen who are out there making a living on the bay on a daily basis. One of our board members actually owns a local seafood restaurant, and he cares about Galveston Bay for lots of reasons, but one is that he hopes he can get good fresh seafood from the bay and serve it to his customers. And then the last group is the industrial users of the bay. And we've already made reference to that, how there's a major petrochemical and industrial complex up and down Galveston Bay, lots of shipping, cargo. And so we try to bring those different users together. And it's not always easy to bring all the users together, but ideally they'll work together to work in the best long-term interest for the health of Galveston Bay. And again, sometimes that's easier said than done, but at least we have those people at the table together. They get to know each other and can communicate with each other, and hopefully come up with solutions to maybe some big problems that address the bay. So what does it lead to? We have a series of different programs that we implement for Galveston Bay. Maybe the first one is education. We work with both adults, but primarily kids, to teach them about Galveston Bay. Why is Galveston Bay important? What is an estuary? And an estuary is a place where the fresh water from our rivers meets the salt water from the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a very productive place. We have a lot of kids who live near Galveston Bay but don't really have access to Galveston Bay, and in some cases they're sort of scared of it. Our bay has a lot of turbidity in it, mud in it, and so it's not like water where you're standing in it, you can see 5 or 6 feet down to your toes, so it's a little bit muddy, and sometimes the kids are scared of it. But once we get them out there and experiencing the bay, they have tons of fun. And we try to work with kids anywhere from kindergarten all the way to high school age and get them to have a Galveston Bay experience. We do lots of restoration work, coastal restoration. And by that, I mean, we have losses of certain types of habitat around the bay over the years for a variety of reasons. We've lost coastal wetlands, a lot of development, but also subsidence. Our land was sinking. And so the coastal fringe wetlands that were on the edge of the bay, got too deep and they opened up into open water. We've lost oyster reef in Galveston Bay. Years ago, they used to take oyster shell out of the bay, not just to harvest the oysters and go eat the oysters, but to make road base out of it. So they'd make roads and driveways with oyster shell. And they took way too much oyster shell out in too short a period of time, and that wasn't sustainable. So we just have a fraction of what we have left, or what we once had. And then we have our underwater seagrasses that we've lost around the bay. Those are the grasses that you don't see because they're below the water, but they're very important to the health of various critters and fish. And for a variety of reasons, we've lost a lot of those seagrasses. So we work to restore some of those habitats. We restore wetlands, we restore oyster reef, we restore seagrasses, and we work with partners. We do it on our own, but we also work with partners, state agencies, federal agencies, other nonprofit partners to try to restore some of that habitat. And in some cases, we're making good progress restoring wetlands. It's very positive. Another thing we do as an organization is that we do land conservation. So by that, I mean, we work to conserve land, land that's not going to be developed in the future. It's going to be open space. There's public access to some of those lands where people can get out and hike and walk around a trail, or the land just does all the things that open space is supposed to do. It absorbs floodwaters. It allows for trees and fish and critters to exist. And so we've conserved about 14,000 acres of land around Galveston Bay, and that's a growing number. We just closed on a 4,700 acre tract of land last fall to increase that number. So we're excited about that. And then we also do advocacy work around Galveston Bay. And by that, I mean, we try to raise the profile of the bay. The geography of Houston is such that downtown Houston is not right next to the bay. It's about 20 miles away from the bay. And so, the way I talk about it is if you're in downtown San Francisco and you look out the window, you see San Francisco Bay. If you're in Seattle and you look out the window, you see Puget Sound. If you're in Baltimore, you look out the window, you see Chesapeake Bay. Well, in Houston, if you look out the window from downtown, you don't see the bay. And so we try to, raise the profile of the bay and try to convince people who might live 20 miles from the bay or 40 miles from the bay who don't see the bay on a daily basis, why it's still important for all of Houston to have a clean, healthy bay, a place that we can all go recreate, we can all go fish, swim, and not worry about getting sick. And so that's really where our advocacy efforts are based. And one of the things we do there is we do an annual report card on the health of Galveston Bay. And we try to make that so it's geared towards the average person, not towards the scientists in the crowd. The scientists in the crowd will have a lot of understanding, but we want the average person to understand, why is Galveston Bay healthy? Why is it not healthy? What can we do to fix it? And so all of those things that we do, we try to get people involved. So we've got lots of different volunteers who help us, ranging from our board members who help us run the organization to people who are out cleaning up trash or people who are out planting marsh grass in a marsh restoration process. We have people who take water quality samples. We've got thousands of volunteers who help us in a regular year. And particularly now that it seems like, COVID is breaking a little bit, it's great to get people out, and particularly outside where we don't have to worry as much and to do good things for the environment.
Well, I've got to say that I'm really happy to hear when you say that you create annual reports that are made for the people and not for scientists, because sometimes I feel like this is such a huge barrier to get things through, right? We don't really make the information get to the people that have the greatest impact in solving the problem. So
yeah, exactly.
that's
We've got
great.
6 million people who live around our region, and only a small fraction of them are scientists, but the rest of them are just regular people who, hopefully you're translating it such that they understand why it's important and can get involved. And that's really what our goal is.
Yeah, that makes the whole difference, I think. And I gotta say also that I'm quite impressed and excited about the extent of the work that you do. It's very thorough. It's very complete, I dare to say. And for everyone listening or watching us on YouTube, you can check in the website that is Galv Bay, Galv, Galv, Bay, BAY.org. They have a map where you can click on it and see what the foundation has been doing around the bay, and you see that they have just this huge amount of dots.
Yeah, the dots really, are projects. Yeah,
yeah, it's really, really impressive, and I'm really mesmerized about it. But I also kept thinking that you said the first thing you said was we try to work with everyone, every single person that is an actor in this chain, right? There is that has some impact, even economic or just using this area. So I believe that this is at least one of the challenges you face, that might be to actually make these people work together. But what else are you seeing that might make your work harder?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that makes our work harder these days really is, a lot of people consider success, but Houston just is growing. It's more and more people moving here every day. And so that means that there's more land developed outside of the city. And essentially the biggest sort of environmental threat to the health of Galveston Bay is not necessarily the pollution from an industrial facility, because that's regulated by the Clean Water Act in the States. And so those point source discharges where there's an actual discharge from a specific location, they have a permit for those and they have to comply with that permit. If they don't comply with it, there could be an enforcement action. But the biggest issue is what we call non-point source discharges. The water that flows off the rest of our geographic region. It comes from your lawns and from your cars, and it's just the storm water. When it rains, it picks up these pollutants and it washes it down to Galveston Bay. And at the same time, I made reference to, we're developing more and more land, and that leads to more runoff outside the bay. And I think that's the hardest kind of pollution to deal with, right? Is the non-point source pollution, because really you need to reach out and get people's attention. And what we talk about is that anybody who lives, basically within 100 miles of Galveston Bay can have an impact on the health of Galveston Bay. And it can be a positive one or it can be a negative one. So there's a lot of different things that we talk to people about, really simple things, like fertilizing your lawn. Don't put too much fertilizer. A lot of people think, wow, if I put more fertilizer on my lawn, the grass is going to be even greener. Well, a lawn can only take so much fertilizer. And if you put too much on, it's going to wash off, and it's going to wash into the storm sewer and then wash down to the bayou and into the bay. And too much fertilizer in the bay is a bad thing because it provides too much nutrients and it can lead to oxygen loss. And so we tell people, hey, just, if you're going to use fertilizer, just use the recommended amount. Don't use too much, and don't put it down right before it's going to rain, because if it rains, it's going to wash it all into the storm sewer. It's not going to help you. So very little things like that. But if everybody listens, 6 million people doing positive things can really make a positive effort on the bay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thinking about positive impact, how can people actually take action with you guys? What are the best ways to do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple different ways to get involved directly. And you can find these on our website. You mentioned it before, galvbay.org. We keep a volunteer list. So you can sign up for an e-news that will go to anybody's interest in volunteer opportunities. And our volunteer coordinator will send out a monthly email and let people know what's going on for the next month. And we get people signed up to, again, do all the things that try to help the bay. And I mentioned several of them before. We do a lot of trash cleanups. We've done some marsh grass planting. We've done some oyster reef creation with volunteers, where the volunteers are essentially putting oyster shell into bags and then stacking those bags and creating oyster habitat. So you can get involved as a volunteer, and there's lots of volunteer opportunities. The other way, of course, is to become a donor for the Galveston Bay Foundation. We raise money to support our efforts. We're not independently wealthy, so we have to raise money from individuals and corporations and foundations, and we do special events. And so we'd love to get more people involved. financially, if you're interested in, it could be $25, and that's a really important gift. And we, any gift is important to us. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a large amount, because every gift is special. So, then ultimately we will occasionally send out emails and ask people to contact various public representatives and take positions on certain things. That's probably more infrequent. It's more about just getting those people involved directly ourselves.
Nice, very nice. And if you don't mind, I would like also to talk about this possibility of reporting issues like reporting pollution and oil spills, because I feel like this is also something interesting for people to do if they can help.
Yeah, so this is a concept we call the Galveston Bay Action Network. And it was sort of born out of the fact that we get a lot of phone calls from the public, and they'll say, hey, I live in Galveston County and I saw somebody dumping trash on the side of the ground, who do I report it to? Or I live in Harris County and I saw a little small oil sheen, somebody must have spilled oil, who do I report it to? And so we created, originally it was an app that works on an Android and an iPhone. It's now web-based. And so people can get online and actually report their pollution sighting, and the web will actually route it to the right entity so that the right entity will respond to it and try to get it cleaned up, or whatever the response needs to be. And so we still do that. And again, it's called the Galveston Bay Action Network, and you can find that on our website. And it was really just to try to facilitate some of these reporting issues in some ways to kind of be proactive and not get the phone calls that we were once getting, and allow people to do it themselves. And it's worked really well. It's nice to put people in touch and they feel like they're involved and they can hopefully fix a problem if they see those types of problems.
Oh, I love it. I think it's a great initiative, truly. So, and
Great.
Well, thank you so very much for talking to us today, Bob. I loved hearing more about the foundation. And do you have a final message for everyone listening?
Yeah, the environment is so important for all of us, right? But we're not a partisan organization. We're about clean water. I mentioned it earlier. We want a healthy bay where everyone can fish or swim and not worry about getting sick. And so we have that. We have this incredible natural resource, Galveston Bay. Despite all the uses, all the multiple uses, it's actually a pretty healthy place. But it's healthy because we care about it and we sort of invest back into it. And so if we didn't do that, I would worry about the health of Galveston Bay. We've got all these threats. But I think, the moral of this story is the glass is definitely half full, and we can make that glass even fuller as we move forward, creating this great place that we can all enjoy and be proud of. That
was super great. Thank you so much.
And my pleasure.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, also, thank you. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to press subscribe on YouTube, on your podcast app, because that shows the algorithm that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of the Galveston Bay Foundation. Bye, and see you at the next episode.